Hey guys, HardlyBriefDan here with another episode of the Unity Making RPG series. Today we're going to continue working on our inventory system. We are not going to be looking at the inventory list that we created last time, but instead we're going to be working on the icon one. But basically everything I talk about in this video will apply to both. So if you choose to work on the list, all the things I talk about now will work on the list inventory and the icon one, or whatever kind you make for your project. But basically, this video is going to be in two parts. The first part, we're going to talk about setting the proper icon, and then the second part, we'll start working on dragging icons around. So in an icon-based inventory, or even in a list, you want to drag an item out of your inventory and maybe place it somewhere. So this way, we can do that. So let's first start with our item icon. When I press play here, you see all of our icons are swords, and even when the slot's empty, it's still a sword, and we don't want that. So that's really easy to stop. Basically, in our prefabs folder, we have a item slot prefab, and we have an item icon, and what we want to do is turn off the item icon. So now, that is off by default. When I press play, all of our slots are empty, right? So what we need to do is actually go ahead and just turn that game object back on when there's something in the slot. So if we go into Visual Studio and you open up the inventory window class, we have a method called add items from inventory. And we wrote this little comment down here that says look at the item and add the proper icon to display. So what we'll do is turn on that game object. And the way you find that is by saying inventory slots of I, and we'll do dot transform dot get child, and we're going to pass it as 0, and I'll explain this in just a moment. Then we're going to do dot game object dot set active, and we're going to pass it true. And let me demonstrate this working, and then I'll explain the line of code. So hit Control to save, go into Unity, and press play, and we should see we have two icons now that show that we have two items in our inventory. Everything else is empty. So we're displaying an icon when we actually have something, and we're displaying nothing when we don't have something, which is perfect. Now we just need to figure out which icon to display, and we'll talk about that. But go back into Visual Studio first, and I'll explain this line of code. Basically, what we're doing is we have this inventory slots list, which is game object, and what we're doing is we're finding the game object, we're getting its transform, and we're saying, hey, how many children do you have? Or out of all the children you have, give me the first one. Give me the 0 index. I just want the first child. And when you give me that first child, give me its game object and set it to true. Turn it on. So in Unity, in our prefab, we have an item slot. It has one child. If it had two, it'd be 0 and 1, and we could find both of them. But we just want the first one, which remember indexes start at 0. We start at 0 and then we count upwards, and we're setting it active, meaning we are clicking this little checkbox, or by code we're saying, hey, turn this little checkbox, turn it on, make a check mark there. That's all that code does. That line of code. It's pretty simple. Hopefully you understand. And we're gonna go ahead and move on. So now in our base item, I'm going to show you one way we can assign an icon, and then I'll tell you why we're not going to use it for now, and then we'll create another way to set the proper icon. So in our base item class, we created a enum called item types, and we said we have two item types. We have equipment and we have weapons. In the first video we created on items in the original Make an RPG series, we had several types of items. And you can have as many types of items as you want. This is just, we made it a little simpler, and it's easy to show. But basically, we're going to be using item types to find the proper icon that we want. And one way to do that is right when you create the icon. So you could create a public variable here called, give it a type sprite, and call it icon. And in the base item constructor here, we could assign the icon a sprite. And we can assign it by using a resources.load method, and we want it of type sprite, and we can send it its path. Right. So if you have a resources folder, which I'll show you in Unity, and you say .load load it as a sprite, and then you send the path of where that item is, then we can load the icon when we create it. Now the reason why we're not going to be using this is because you can't serialize a sprite. You can't turn it into binary ones and zeros. And if you remember, in like 20-30 videos ago, I showed you guys how to get specific items from a database and then save them using serialization, which this won't work. Now you can still get the icon from the database, that works fine, but if you want to serialize it and save it that way, this won't work. You have to create another way. And I'm going to show you to do that, create that way now. But first, let's go into Unity and talk about this resources.load. So in Unity here, Unity has a lot of specific folders you can use. One of them is called resources. So in the project folder, I created a folder called resources, went to create and hit folder and typed in resources. If you do this, Unity will know to find this folder when you call it, and it will find whatever's in it. Inside it, I created another folder called item icons, and then I put the two sprites in here, armor and sword, my two sprites in that folder. So now when I call resources.load, I can send it the path item icons / whatever icon I want. So now that I've kind of talked about that one way, let's go into our inventory window class and create the other method that I wanted to show. So if you're using serialization, you can't serialize a sprite. The way we're going to do it, or the way I'll show you, is we're going to search for the icon that we want for every item. So we'll create a private method. It's going to return a type sprite. We'll call it return item icon. And return item icon is going to take a base item, and we'll call it item. So we're going to need to pass it an item. And we'll set up our variables now. So we'll say sprite. We'll call it icon is equal to a new sprite. And then we'll return it. So now, in between this, we need to set up our logic. So using this item we pass, we can check its item type with an if-else statement. You can also use like a switch case or maybe like a for loop. You have a ton of types. It's really up to you. But what we'll do is say if item dot item type is equal to our double equal sign base item dot item types dot equipment. So if our item type is equipment, then we want to display the armor icon. So what we'll do is say icon is equal to resources dot load. We want to cast it as a sprite, or say, hey, load it as a sprite. And then we want to send it its path, which is a string. So you type in item, icons, or whatever you named your folder, and then the icon you want. And my icon is labeled armor. So this code here says it's setting this variable icon equal to a sprite that is loaded in our resources folder in the path item icon / armor. And in Unity you can see that our resources folder, the path is item icons folder, and we labeled it armor. So now we need to add our else statement because we have two types. Remember, we have a weapon type and equipment type. So if it's not equipment, then we know it's a weapon. So we want to say icon is equal to resources dot load. We want to load a sprite, and we're going to set it its path, which is again item icons, or whatever you labeled your folder, and then I want the sword icon. So here's our very simple logic. We only have two item types. Again, if you have a lot more item types, you're going to have more if statements or a switch case or some logic way to get it. And then once we assign it, we want to return it. Now, in our add items from inventory, when we find an item in our inventory and we assign its name and then we turn on that icon, we want to set the icon now. So we've found the child, we've turned it on, now we need to set it. So I'm going to copy this code. Just Control C to copy. I'm going to erase this dot set active here. And we're going to say get component now. And we want to get its image component. And then we want to set its sprite. So you type in sprite. And we set that equal to, and we're going to set it equal to our return item icon method. So we'll say return item icon. We're going to pass it player inventory of I, which is just an item. So let me say what we're doing. The smartest way, by the way, to do this is probably to cache this this child object, but it's not important right now. But basically, we're saying inventory slots, get its transform, find the first child of all of its children, get that child's game object, get the component image that's attached to that game object, and then find its sprite, and we're going to set it equal to a new sprite, which is based on our item type. Now hit Control to save, go into Unity, and if everything worked, I didn't code anything wrong, we should see that we have a armor icon and a sword icon. And we do. Here we have a armor icon because the type is armor, and a sword because the type is weapon. So now we're setting proper icons for the type of item that's in the slot. Now that brings us to the next part of the video, which is a very highly requested item to be covered, and that is dragging. How do I click an icon, say I want this sword, I want to drag it and do something with it? How do we do that? Well, Unity has a great event system library that allows us to access a couple interfaces that can implement a dragging method for us. So let's get started with that. In Visual Studio, we have our inventory window class, and we have a selected item class. Selected item class is each item. So each icon here has a script selected item. And what we want to do is use an interface on each of these. So we're going to use it in our selected item class. We're going to use the library. So up at the top, we want to say using Unity Engine dot event systems. Okay, this event systems is going to allow us access to a couple interfaces. Now, if you don't know what an interface is, a brief explanation for it. It's like everyone always calls it. It's like a contract. Basically, you say if I include this interface, I need to include whatever methods it says to include or variables. You can have unlimited, I believe, unlimited interfaces for a select class. You can only inherit one other class, but you can have unlimited interfaces. So the interface we're going to use is iDrag handler, and this is this iDrag handler interface is included in the Unity engine and event systems. And now that we've implemented, or now that we have it, we need to implement it. And in Visual Studio, you can use this little icon here and click Implement Interface. Now, if I scroll down, it's added this public void onDrag method. So if you're using MonoDevelop and that little icon doesn't show up, make sure that you type in public void onDrag, and then in parentheses, the argument it's going to take is a pointer event data. That's the type, and then it's called event data. And we're not going to be using this throw new exception thing. So you can get rid of that. And the first thing we want to type is a debug statement. So we're going to say debug log, and we'll say I am dragging. Control to save. Make sure you put your semicolon. Control to S saved again. And now in Unity, when I press play, each slot here is going to have. Oh, excuse me, I hit the microphone. Each slot here is going to have this iDrag handler. And when I click an icon, let's say click the sword, look at the console down in the bottom. You'll see it's saying I am dragging. It's registering that I'm dragging something. And you can see it counting down here as I drag. And let go, it won't do it. Click and drag. So this is, now that we have this function, we can do a whole bunch of different things. We can say, well, now that we know we're dragging, we can set all kinds of different variables. We can create all different logic to do different things while we're dragging. And that's where we're going to start today in this video, and then we'll pick up in the next video. So the first thing we want to do is in our canvas, we want to create create a UI image here, and we're going to relabel it, and we're going to click it dragged icon. I'm going to change its size to 50 by 50. This can be whatever you want, doesn't have to be that. And I'm going to turn it off. Plain and simple. We're going to keep it off for now. We're going to go into our inventory window class. At the top, we're going to create a public variable, and it's going to be of type sprite. oh, excuse me, it's going to be a game object, and we're going to call it dragged icon. And I'm going to double click that, click Control C to copy. Actually, excuse me, you don't need to do that. Go into Unity. You should see on our inventory window we have a new dragged icon game object. We can drag the icon onto it. So you see I just dragged the icon now. And what we want to do is check if we are dragging, then we want to set a variable to is dragging variable to true. So a couple ways we can handle this. We are going to create a public method. So we'll say public void show dragged icon, or item. We'll say item because we're dragging an item, not just an icon. So this method we can call, since it's public, we can call it in our selected item class. So in our selected item class, when we're in our on drag, what we want to do is find our inventory window dot. We want to get its component inventory window. Actually, sorry, excuse me. Do game object dot find. We want to find the inventory window. We want to get component of inventory window, and then we want to call this show dragged item method. So when we're dragging, we're going to find this method, and what I'll do is I'm going to cut this debug statement, Control S, and we're going to paste it in our inventory show drag item method. So now go into Unity, press play. Hopefully the code works, and it does. And when I drag, we should still see I am dragging, but it's being called in the other function. So now what we want to do is in our show dragged item method, we want to set the dragged icon game object. Double click it, hit Control C to copy. Go into show dragged item. We want to set the game object set active to true, so we want to turn it on. So now, press play. I'm dragging, and you see the item is turned on. And we're gonna leave the video here for now. We're about 18 minutes. So basically, we're registering now that we're dragging something, and we're turning on this item icon. The next thing that we need to do is set that item icon to the proper icon, set its placement, and then do a few other things. Hopefully, though, you can look at this iDrag handler that's on a selected item and start creating some of your own logic to figure out how how dragging works. But please stay tuned for the next video. We'll go ahead and get all into how it works and making a full system where we can drag items and move them to different slots and stuff. Hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe. If you do, stay tuned for more videos in the future, and I'll talk to you guys next time.